Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. Wanted to welcome you to this first Introduction to Acquisitions webinar. We're going to be talking just really about getting started with acquisitions, and then there will be a time at the end for you to ask any questions that you may have. This is really meant as kind of a preliminary inspirational webinar to give you a little bit more context for what acquisitions is and what it can mean in your libraries. My name is Ruth Frazier. I am the interim coordinator for Evergreen, Indiana, and the primary trainer right now. My contact information is here, and you are always welcome to use that. Reach out if you have questions or concerns related to this or whatever within the consortium. We're going to start by, well, before I say that, I do want to let you know that this is also being recorded and will be available eventually, hopefully in the next couple weeks, on the Evergreen Indiana Training YouTube channel. You're also going to have access to these slides. There will be a follow-up email that includes a LEU certificate link to this slide deck. And in fact, I always tend to forget this, and now I have some regret. So I'm going to actually get access to these slides for you right now so that you can refer to them at your leisure, and also have access to the links that are in it. So let me get that link for you very quickly. And by very quickly, I mean as quickly as the internet will allow me to. All right, here we go. I'm going to be putting this into chat. Also, a reminder about the chat that if you want to send messages to me, which you are welcome to do, you can either select hosts and panelists or my name. If you want to send a message that the entire group can see, then select everyone from that drop down next to where it says to in your chat box. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What is acquisitions? Generally, when we're talking about acquisitions, it refers to the processes by which a library budgets for, selects, purchases, receives, and then pays for the items in its collections. Every library that exists to any degree whatsoever, as opposed to a museum, but a library already does acquisitions through that process where you determine what you want to get, you determine if you have the money to get it, and then you order it, you receive it, you catalog it, and you have now acquired. So this is what acquisitions refers to. In Evergreen, acquisitions, and I have it in quotes here because there are these different things. It's a noun that also refers to behaviors. In Evergreen, acquisitions refers to the software tools that are available to automate and to manage aspects of those general acquisitions processes in a manner that integrates with the other parts of the ILS. The Evergreen acquisitions module includes a lot of things. Some things that some people may never see, some things that you may never actually see. It includes administration tools and workflow tools, along with settings in the library, settings editor, and special staff permissions. Currently, we have 3 staff permission levels, but which seem to be functioning really well. But if at a point you discover that maybe we need to refine that, that's also a really nice thing about acquisitions in Evergreen, Indiana, is that we will work with you to create or advise in a way that works best with your library. So the question has been asked often, actually, in Evergreen, Indiana, why use acquisitions? We have 4 or 5 libraries of the 126 public libraries who are currently using the acquisitions module in Evergreen, which means that we have 121 libraries that are not using it. And hopefully, as we go further into this, you can determine if it's something that may actually help your library meet its goals in terms of providing service to your communities. So the first thing, and these are in no particular order, the first thing that acquisitions can help your library do is to track your materials budget. Of course, in a library budget, we have our category 4, which is basically our capital stuff. And then we have things within that, whether it be 4.2 or 4.5 or whatever, however your line items are split out in your library. And that's your certified budget that, of course, goes to the state. But then within that, you may have already, I said 121 of Evergreen, Indiana public libraries do not use acquisitions right now. And we're really hoping to change that. So there are reasons, and we will definitely talk about that later on, why that has not been something that libraries have found attractive, and maybe you'll kind of intuit as we go through. There are 5 libraries that I can think of offhand that are using acquisitions in Evergreen, Indiana. There are a lot that are using it in Evergreen out in the world, but in Evergreen, Indiana, there are 5. So this will allow you to track those more granularized budgets where perhaps you have this much money set aside for your adult fiction and this much money set aside for your easy readers, or however you have that set up. Acquisitions can help you track that spending. It also is going to give you the opportunity to make purchased materials, so stuff that you bought, discoverable by patrons prior to it actually being on hand or even cataloged. So then you have the opportunity for patrons to have holds for things that are on order. If you have EDI set up, which is something to consider whether you want to or not, you have the opportunity to order materials directly through the ILS. It's another step that gets automated and can even further keep this process organized and your workflows flowing. It does provide a mechanism to jumpstart the cataloging process. This has got some dollar words in it, but they're very important. It provides for aggregated, so we're bringing all of this stuff together, and organized collection development, which for me, this little phrase here is the most important thing. We know that our ILS does that for our patrons and for our catalog. Now acquisitions as another thing that aggregates this even more and organizes another aspect of our library. The other nice thing about the acquisitions tools within the module is that they're customizable to work with your workflows. Now, I say that I do want to let you know, we're going to talk about this as we go on. There may be some things that are happening in your library that are inefficient. And so they're probably, those workflows they will change. And so while this can customize to accommodate your workflows will also evolve to accommodate the use of the tool. So it's somewhere this meeting in the middle. So we kind of know the what. I've kind of described the why, and there may be other reasons that you envision acquisitions being important in your library. This is not a comprehensive list at all. So, but just to give you an idea if you have no idea. So now we're going to take a look at some of the interfaces that are in Evergreen, Indiana, within the ILS. We're going to start with the acquisitions administration. This is what we will be covering in more depth tomorrow. And it involves setting that stage for the use of acquisitions in your library. Just a couple things to keep in mind for this, and I'll kind of reiterate this as we go forward, is that the basics here are what are going to allow it to be useful. Then there are some enhancements or customizations that you in your library can add on if you want to, if they somehow alleviate an issue you have or they get you further toward your goals, they may help you in that. So we're going to take a look at the acquisitions administration page. You can access that through the administration menu and then going to acquisitions administration, and you come up with this administration page. Now I am going to also go to the live staff client, make sure that it's big enough so everybody can see it. And I will be going between the slides, which will be in this tab, and the client as needs be. I really like to show you as much as live as possible, but I don't want you to get whiplash going between the tabs either. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Acquisitions Administration. And this is where we set up all of the things that are going to allow us and other staff members in our library to use the acquisitions module. This is where we're going to say where we get our money from. So that's going to be our funding sources. And I'm going to go in here, and I do want to show you some of these things. And you can see here, I see all of the funding sources for every library that's using acquisition. So you can see some of them. I know that West Lafayette is actually not using, and Noble County, they're not using this actively right now, but Jackson County, Newburgh, Hussey Mayfield, also Putnam County, and somebody that I'm forgetting, but Porter County are using this. And this is where you would go, and you can see that I have funding sources for Jackson County from 2008. This is also a filterable interface. So I'm going to scope this. Oh, you can see I actually am very happy to make these types of mistakes in front of you because, first of all, to show you that these are not fatal mistakes and to show you common places to get hung up here. So now if I have this filtered, you can see that I am showing just Jackson County. Now, one thing I do want to show you about some of these interfaces, and we're going to talk about setting these up tomorrow, but I do want to give you a heads up. So we have some newer interfaces. You can see here, this is one of the older ones. And when I say newer or older, that's actually referring to the way that it displays. This displays in an older way. And one of the idiosyncrasies of this is that it only displays 15 here once it has been filtered. So I actually need to page to the next ones. And the only reason I bring that up is if I'm looking through this, it doesn't really look like this is active because the last funding source they had was 2020, but that doesn't make any sense because I know that they're using it. You can see now I see these from the current year. I'm going to change this filter to another library because I want to also make sure that, oh, I think I'm going to go ahead and refresh this and I'm going to do a fresh filter on that. So we can see everyone's funding. For the time being, yes. Well, I say that. You can see everybody's funding where you have a working location. I have a working location for every library in the system. And so I can always see all of those things. You may not be able to, and I don't know that we have somebody in here from an acquisitions library right now. In some of these older interfaces, it does show you more information than you were expecting. Those things, as these interfaces are being rewritten, are generally accounted for so that it has to do with your working locations. They can sometimes be scoped, but generally not. That is a good question that uncovers an idiosyncrasy from some of the earlier interfaces here. I did want to, okay, so it does have to do then with your working locations. Thank you, Megan, for pointing that out. And Megan is at a library that has done some investigation of acquisitions before, and so there is an older funding source that is showing up there, I think. Megan, I'm assuming that you can see the Jeffco funding source in there. So the thing that I wanted to point out here by scoping this differently is that where Jackson County had their funding sources more granularized, you can see Hussey Mayfield, they have theirs pretty general. So for 2022, they have their funding sources as operating and gifts. And that's really, this is a general thing. So the places where you get money are going to go in here. And then from there, going back into acquisitions administration. Once we have funding sources, then we can start setting up funds, and then we can go into the other aspects of preparing to actually use acquisitions. Then we have the actual tools for our workflows. Once everything has been set up, we've built that firm or solid foundation for the things we're going to do. We have the tools available through the acquisitions menu. And I have a touchy mouse, so I apologize for that. Within this menu, there are, again, a lot of tools. It is important to keep in mind that depending on your workflows, you may or may not use all of them. and you may use them in different order. It really is determined by what you are going to be doing. Do want to just point out a few highlights here, and I'll start with this page looking at the menu itself. It starts out with these two different searches. The first, the general search, allows you to search for those things that have been ordered or are going to be ordered one way or the other, were someplace already in the acquisitions flow in Evergreen. And then the provider search allows you to search for those organizations where you get the stuff from, and then to see information about them. You can see each of these little sections in here are divided by that pretty faint gray line. And so the next bunch of links have to do with beginning the process for determining what's going to be included in an order. Now, one thing that we're not really talking about right now, and we will in a few minutes, has to do when a lot of that work is actually done through a vendor's website. And probably the easiest example is going to be Baker and Taylor and their Title Source 360 tool, where of course you have your carts, you're creating your order there. So you would probably, in most cases, skip this first section where it has selection lists, new brief records, things like that, but not necessarily. Because then we also have Amazon, where you may be creating a cart and ordering it, but you don't get things like MARC records from Amazon and things like that. So there are these tools in that middle section that you may or may not use, and we will talk more about those on Thursday and get in there and play around. We'll pause and say that both tomorrow and Thursday, what we will be doing in there is going to be much more of a walkthrough using the training server to actually show you how to set things up and then get some practice doing the basics in terms of acquisitions, with the exception, we won't be setting up EDI, but we will be talking about that. And we'll be talking about that on both days because it is handled on both days. Then the next part, where it starts with load, mark, order records, purchase orders, and create purchase orders, that's where we're actually getting to the point of ordering things here, activating things, which we'll talk about that on Friday, to be prepared to receive them in our library, and also to create those on order records in the system so that patrons can be placing holds on them. And then there are a few more things below that have to do with claiming if things don't show up or don't show up in the manner you expected them to. And then, of course, invoicing, which is going to be part of that bookkeeping portion of the software. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank you for the questions that you're asking right now. Feel free to put more in. You're not going to derail anything. And if it's something that we're going to talk about, just say we're going to talk about that in a moment. This next part is really what I want to be very purposeful about explaining, answering any questions. I know that for the most part, the people who are in here are not using acquisitions. I know that there's at least one case of a library that is looking at what acquisitions looks like in Evergreen and potentially considering how that would work for their library as well, but they are using it in another manner. So planning for acquisitions when you are going from 0 to something is the most important thing. I often, as I have gone through these processes and as somebody who does not use acquisitions for my library yet, of course, my library is a 4-shelf bookcase for the consortial collection that manages High Hold. So it's a very humble library. And I spent so much time working on the development side and the training side with acquisitions that actually putting it into implementing it for my 4-shelf library has fallen a little bit by the wayside because I don't do a lot of ordering. But if you scale that up to a full-size library, the use of acquisitions and going from 0 to using acquisitions is similar to planning for going from a non-automated library collection to using an ILS. Another good analogy is going from keeping track of your bookkeeping in a ledger to going to some software solution to manage now your bookkeeping. This is similar to that, where you're now thinking about all of the processes that go into that general idea of acquisitions, which is your budgeting, your selecting, your ordering, your receiving, all of those things into one location. So planning is just fundamental to this. It is essential for a successful implementation of acquisitions. It is also, acquisitions is not just one feature. It's a collection of integrated tools that require a lot of information and decision-making beforehand. This is perhaps, as a former manager and as somebody that thinks about libraries from a very holistic and upper level mechanism, where I'm thinking about administration coming all the way to that frontline desk worker. Rolling out acquisitions in your library requires institutional buy-in. Your catalogers, your patron service librarians, your reference desk, CERC desk, whatever it is, there has to be organizational buy-in here, institutional buy-in, because this is going to change, at least in some respect, everything that happens in your library. Patrons will now be able to put things on hold prior to them being received. So what does that mean then? When you receive that thing, how do you make sure then that that hold is honored, that patron is notified? All of those things. How do you deal with patron requests for acquisitions? And that's something that we will talk a little bit about. We can actually look at that interface today a little bit, because it is kind of a 75% there process right now. We're hoping to make it better. But if you kind of plan all of this in a vacuum, and I have seen this happen at least 2 libraries where they really wanted to do acquisitions. And by they, I mean, not just one person, but 2 or 3 people at the management level, but they hadn't convinced their staff They hadn't explained how it would be helpful, those types of things. And so it never really took off because there wasn't that buy-in. Also, remember that Evergreen Indiana administration, I am part of that, can and will provide assistance with you. That assistance can come in the form of advice and suggestions. It can come in the form of supporting you as you're setting up certain things in the administration setup, working with vendors if you are setting up EDI, all of those things. We can and will provide assistance and support in this process. This is one of those things. I was talking with a colleague yesterday about something else related to acquisitions. And he is a senior developer who has touched every aspect of Evergreen, Indiana. And his comment was, if you ask 5 libraries about acquisitions, you will get 8 opinions. And so you are highly encouraged to ask questions, reach out as often and as necessary. If you really want to do this in your library, which I highly encourage, don't feel like you have to do it on your own. That's one of the great benefits of being part of the Evergreen Indiana Consortium, is that your support team, while it is not huge and is not all-knowing, definitely is really invested in your success in those things that you purpose for your library. And then we have a planning worksheet. I'm not going to click on that right now because we're going to revisit the planning worksheet in a moment. So there are some things to consider as you are planning. First, who's going to be doing what? And the way that you start with this is you look in your library right now, you think about what is this general acquisitions process we're talking about, and you determine who is doing what right now, because you're doing acquisitions already. What money is being used? Again, you're already doing acquisitions. These already have concrete answers. And there may be some things within here that are a little ambiguous in your library. This is an opportunity to audit your current acquisition processes to make them less ambiguous, or to define the ambiguity a little bit more. So what money is being used? How are you planning to allocate it? I will say, when I was doing collection development for Hagerstown Library, I was pretty loose with my allocations, not with my budget. I was very strict with my budget, my certified budget. But then the allocations, I tended to have, I had a little formula, what I could spend over here, and it just needed to vaguely align. And I had some goals throughout the year. You may have that, or you may have a very well-defined spreadsheet that you are maintaining right now that says this person gets to spend this amount of money on this for this shelving location, or this Dewey Decimal range, or whatever. And I have seen examples of all of those things. So how will it be allocated? How is it being allocated right now? And then this is I can't believe that I made this question so that I had it as one question. What are your current processes for ordering, receiving, and paying for materials? And I will tell you, it is processes, because unless you're only getting your things from one vendor or provider, they have requirements, different types of requirements. So perhaps you are ordering through Amazon's interface or through Title Source 360, where you put together in Title Source 360, you get carts from them. You determine quantities that you might want to purchase from them. Either you keep them in that cart, you order a full cart, whatever. You might create one. In Amazon, you have just your one cart, and maybe you can download records from Title Source 360, but not from Amazon. And maybe you also are ordering Usborne books, and you have to go through a paper process because of the one distributor you're working with, but you also have another one where you go through the interface, the online interface. So it really can vary, but you know that in your library, depending on what you're getting, your processes are different. So what are those processes? And then start thinking about what needs to change, but also what can stay the same. Just a little note here about EDI. It is, when you set it up, and there are vendors who allow you to do EDI ordering. I'll take a little break here and say EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange. So it is an automatic sending of orders and receiving a reply and receiving invoices from a vendor. Baker and Taylor is one that provides for this. Midwest Tape is one. Ingram does, I believe Brodart does as well. Those are the ones that come to mind. There may be some others that allow for EDI ordering as well. And then some recommendations for your planning. Again, in most cases, you're going from 0 to 100 with acquisitions. So keep it simple and start with the basics. We'll talk about those things in terms of, first of all, in your library. Maybe you don't need to get super granular with your money allocations yet. Maybe you have, let's say you have 3 branch locations, and each branch location is going to be purchasing adult materials or adult fiction materials, adult nonfiction materials, adult AV. And then they're going to have juvenile, which will, in this case, I'm going to lump within that. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to say, then we have YA nonfiction, YA fiction, YA AV, and then juvenile nonfiction, fiction, AV. And so we have those 9 allocations within each branch. So we have 27 funds that are set up, if I did that math correctly. That could even be a little bit less complicated than that. Keep it as simple as you can to get as much granularization as you need. Now, if you get really comfortable in that and say that you are assigning, I'm not even going to go into that. Again, this is meant to be inspirational, something for you to think about. Take the time to plan as thoroughly as possible. And it is not, in my opinion, outside the realm to, once you say, we're going to do acquisitions, and then to start saying, now we're going to start this planning. This could be anywhere from a 3 to 6 month process. I would encourage you to set deadlines for that, but also to give you and your staff enough time to plan together, to gather this data, to get it as organized as you can, and we'll look at the planning sheet in a moment, and then to also plan a schedule for rollout. This is where it gets kind of messy. because there isn't just a line that says do this first and then that and then that and then that and then that and everything works now. Because each library system already has its own processes and is going to have, using acquisitions or not, its own processes that are going to be based on the staff available, the money available, and the time available. So while it is definitely great to get advice from colleagues and ask about best practices and all of that, it is so important to remember that your library is going to do things at the very least subtly, at the most completely different from even your neighbor Evergreen, Indiana library. So keep that in mind as well. Okay. So I do want to point out some resources here. The first one is the Evergreen, Indiana Acquisitions Training Manual. And I do need to say that it's incomplete because I'm the one that's putting it together and I have not completed it yet. I'm hoping to work on that some more this afternoon, but there is a good body of information there so far. And wait for it to load. There we go. So it does have, of course, you can use the Google Outlines view here. Make this a little bit bigger. And I'll actually skip down to where it is not. Where I have left off kind of in two places. So invoicing, electronic invoicing, there we go. And then in administration, I believe it's actually pretty close to that. Oh, funding sources. So I'm hoping to actually get some more work done on that. But there is a lot of great information prior to that. This is some that is aggregated from other documentation websites for acquisitions in Evergreen, and some that have to do with Evergreen, Indiana policies and procedures, which we don't have a whole lot of policies and procedures for acquisitions at this point, but you'll see some customized things in here. Then the next thing is the Evergreen general documentation, which some of that has been integrated into the training manual. But it is general. So there are two links here. First to the acquisitions administration documentation, and it goes through all of the different things that are in the acquisitions administration page, on that page. And then the documentation related to using acquisitions. And you can kind of pop through. This also has navigation over here and some more navigation over here. So this is going to get you to the left-hand side, is going to get you to the major topics. And then once you're in there, then the right-hand contents will get you to the categories within there. And then the planning worksheet. So now I'd like to take a look at that real quickly. You are welcome to this. What my recommendation to you is that once you are here, if you want to use it, you're going to go to File and then Make a Copy. And so if you have a Google Drive, you can make a copy to that local Google Drive, or you can, I believe, I'm clicking on all the wrong things with the stupid mouse. I believe you can also download this as an Excel with the view privileges that you have. And so that's going to give you the opportunity to go through all this. The first page is notes, and I will probably add a few more notes to this. This was initially created by Anna Gobin, I've done some updating to it, and we'll probably do some more here as well. But then you have tabs along the bottom for staff. And this is going to be those people who are involved in this process. I'm actually gonna just do a quick little thing here real quickly. Can see, okay, actually I'm gonna cancel that, cancel this, and look at this and copy it all. I'm going to do that later. It gets too involved. Okay, so we have our staff. This is where you're going to list those people who are doing a thing. And this could be somebody, and we haven't talked about selection lists. There are 3 permissions in Evergreen. There is local acquisitions administrator. That's somebody that can set up all those foundational building blocks for using it. Then there's also a purchaser who can create purchase orders, load records, all of those things, who can essentially spend the money that you have allocated. And then there are also selectors. Selectors is a pretty limited permission level, and those are people who can create selection lists either by adding brief records or including things that are already in the Evergreen catalog to list that can then be purchased by purchasers. So you may or may not know what their permission group should be yet, but this is a good way to keep track of those people who are involved in the acquisitions process, and then to start organizing it that based on what permissions you think that they might need. This can also be a collaborative thing. Then we also have our funding sources. We talked about this is our pot of money. These are just examples that are in here. But then we have our funds. And you can see that this is much more basic even than what I described, where I had it broken out by fictionality and AV. In this case, the examples are books and it could be print and then non-print or whatever. And then providers are going to be those vendors where you get stuff from. Really, to start this organization process, you just need to have that list of their names. And then the code is going to be something that you establish. And it's just an alphanumeric thing, a short code similar to the short codes that Evergreen Indiana libraries have or Info Express libraries have. You're establishing that code and then making some determinations here, filling in some blanks, and we can help with this, of course. Then we start getting into things like claiming and distributions, and those are kind of those enhancements that you may want to add more information in there. There are some defaults in terms of claiming that are already in the system. And then distribution formulas are essentially like holdings templates, but they are templates that help you define shelving locations, funds that are used, the number of copies going to a branch location or to whatever. So you have some options for setting up distribution formulas, which are templates that can be applied to items within a purchase order. And then I just added this little tab in here, and it's not complete, but it is something essentially to encourage you to think about what are those workflows that you have for these different providers that you may have. And I've been using the term vendor and kind of slowly going toward provider because vendors are referred to as providers in the Evergreen Indiana interface. So to think about what those workflows are for the acquiring of things in your library, all the way from the order to the invoice to the cataloging, and then the eventual circulation of those items. So I just seriously did like about 5 minutes of these most basic beginnings of workflows. And you can see that I got about halfway through Amazon in the acquisitions process. But there are a couple other things that need to go in the middle there. And I'll work on fleshing that out, keeping in mind that these are, in some cases, a little bit hard and fast depending on the provider. In some cases, they're also flexible. Some other things that I have not put in the slides and don't have in this planning worksheet yet, but I do hope to, in preparation for tomorrow, is considering mapping, if you are going to be using EDI, mapping holdings for those records if you want to import holdings using acquisitions, which I will say in most cases, not all libraries do, and you definitely don't have to, but it can also really be helpful for when the things are received, especially if they're going to multiple locations, to have that information going through this whole automated process, the information related to not just the bibliographic record, but then also the holdings that are attached to that record. And so I'm hoping to have some more in this planning document, but it's not necessary if you even want to make a copy of this today and consider these different aspects of it. Okay, so I knew today was going to be a little bit shorter because I really wanted to hopefully either give you some more context for the next couple days or provide you with some tools as you maybe go back to people in your library to see if this is something that you want to pursue, or to generate questions. So are there any questions that you have? And you don't need to feel like you're jumping the gun in terms of workflows, things that we might cover in the next couple days. I'll be glad to go look at some interfaces or answer questions about the acquisitions process if you would like. I'm in a bit of a weird position with this as well, because another part of my job is to work with software developers and to test upcoming components for this. And so I have seen several interfaces in what we will be upgrading to around Labor Day. And so to kind of go back to those older displays, knowing that there will be some newer ones in the next 6 months to a year is a strange thing for me. So all of those administrative interfaces are actually going to be updated at our next upgrade. If there are no questions right now, you are, of course, always welcome to contact me. And I encourage that. Play around with the planning worksheet. Are there sections of the manual that would be helpful to review prior to tomorrow? Not really. We're going to be going through the administration and setup. And so we'll probably actually go a little bit beyond what is in the training manual unless I can get that updated. But you don't need to review it before tomorrow, not at all. I mean, if you want to, you can. Some people like to have that additional context beforehand, but we'll be covering all of it in conjunction with the training manual and all of the administrative interfaces tomorrow.